Hello everybody and welcome on in. Today I've got for you an update to my Fire Staff and Rapier solo PvP build. It's an excellent close quarter fighting build that uses extreme mobility to both get on top of and escape from opponents. The Rapier on this build hits super hard, and I personally haven't come by an opponent that I couldn't kill one-on-one with this spec, even those really tanky healers. And the Fire Staff adds huge utility to the build, giving really easy access to keen speed for really good movement speed uptime, and of course the double gap closer of Flesh and Burnout. Yeah, this build is one of, if not the fastest things on the battlefield. And on top of all that, this build's got an insane amount of stamina sustain, specifically designed for outnumbered fighting. If you guys want to see a written guide to this build, you can find it on my website, pvpnewworld.com. There's a link down below for you guys. And of course, if you enjoy this video, hit that like button and leave a comment if you can. It helps out a lot with the algorithm. Finally, the last half of the video is PvP commentary of the build in action so you guys can see it. Without further ado, let's take a look at that build. Starting off with the attributes, 150 dex, 200 intel, and 150 con. This build is set up for the Rapier to hit hard, but we still have a pretty viable damage option in the Fire Staff. It has a very high crit rate, so it can deal quite a bit of damage when I land a lot of those crits. That being said, the Keen Speed is the utility perk of choice, and a big reason why the crit rate on the Fire Staff is really important too. So the Fire Staff kind of serves a pressure slash utility purpose, while the Rapier is the bulk of the burst damage dealer. Now, taking a look at the important jump points here, 5% crit chance, great for both the Fire Staff and the Rapier. Thrust damage, great for the Rapier, and then that 10 less stamina cost rule, massive for a light armor build. This allows us, with Evade, to have a ton of dodges on this build. And the light armor dodge rule is not only great for dodging attacks, but it's great for mobility as well, so it just adds more speed to the build. And then in the intelligence tree, the 10% light and heavy magic attack damage and the elemental damage only really affects the Fire Staff. 10% critical hit damage is fantastic for both though. And then that 10 mana after a dodge just ensures that you don't need any mana sustain at all in order to run this spec. That being said, if you don't have the required gear score to get enough attribute points in intelligence to reach 200, you're going to have to run mana potions on this build. And then finally, in the Constitution tree, the health consumables being 20% stronger, really nice for PvP. The increased max health based on physical armor, not the biggest deal because we're in light armor, but still not a terrible passive. And then last but not least, minus 10% critical damage taken. This is such a huge deal for PvP. Critical damage is basically the most high intensity damage that you'll take in PvP, so reducing it as much as possible really helps. And then finally, having almost 11.5k HP with the Hardy and Hail buff, really nice just to be able to survive incoming burst in PvP. Taking a look at the Rapier tree, it got nerfed pretty hard in this patch. The cooldowns are a lot more than they used to. Evade is a 12-second cooldown now, so yeah, refreshing is a huge deal if you can get it on this build. Nonetheless, I've built the Rapier tree to focus on things like reducing cooldown on hit and critical. Really nice for the Rapier because as long as you remain offensive, you can keep those cooldowns fairly low. I've also focused on the stamina return on any hit, really nice for PvP as well. Dealing 10% more damage when your target has greater than 50% health. You really only have the option between this one, the Desperation perk, or the Perfectionist perk, so it's really up to you which one you think you'll get more out of. I like On Guard because you're going to be able to take advantage of this all the time. Desperation, we're rolling a lot on this build, so you take a lot of advantage of this one too. Really up to you which ones you want to use, but I would highly recommend going for the sustain perks more than anything else on the Rapier right now. And then finally, Swiftness to gain that additional haste on Rapier hits. Really nice just to keep you more mobile when you're in melee combat. Riposte, fantastic ability for countering attacks and for surviving when you get locked in a really nasty snare, like a gravity well or something like that. Can't go wrong with this ability. The long stun duration allows you to roll behind your opponent and clock them with a fully charged heavy attack quite easily. And then taking a look at Evade, this got nerfed pretty hard in this new patch. However, it is still a fantastic ability for the Rapier, allowing you to have a additional dodge that gives stamina back, and on top of it, it gives your next light attack a little bit more damage if you move forward, and it gives you a movement speed buff after you use it. So something like a dodge, evade, dodge is a fantastic ability for Rapier to stay mobile. What makes Evade really nice, though, is the fact that you can use it to interrupt any action that you're currently using. This allows you to do chains like light attack, evade, light attack, or even use an evade to get out of a really sticky situation where you may be committed to an action that you didn't want to. And then finally, the last skill we've got is Flesh, the gap closer of the Rapier. Not only does it do pretty decent damage when you use it, and it hits everyone that you move through, it allows you to interrupt it with that really nasty backstab at the end. And this can put a huge amount of damage into someone, especially if you want to follow that backstab up with another evade light attack combo or something like that. Needless to say, Flesh is a fantastic kill move when you are close to your opponent and their stamina is drained. They won't be able to dodge, so you can put a huge amount of backstab damage into them with it. It's also a good defensive skill for escaping all kinds of different things and just keeping yourself mobile. Now let's take a look at that Fire Staff tree. Big focus on upping the outgoing damage of the Fire Staff and applying as many burns as possible, as well as upping the critical hit rate and critical damage. The Fire Staff doesn't do as much damage as the Rapier on this build, but it still hits really hard when it lands a lot of crits. So you can catch people off guard with the damage this build puts out, because we have about the 45% crit rate or so with the Fire Staff out. But as you can see, just a big focus on those outgoing damage perks. The Pillar of Fire, I only took the first two passives of it here because the final passive is just about restoring mana, which we have no issues with on this build at all thanks to that roll perk. So we can save that additional point there. And then finally the Fireball, only the initial impact of the Fireball is super important for this spec. That's going to be what procs the Keen Speed and what deals the bulk of damage. Plus in PvP, a lot of people aren't willingly sitting in an AoE if you're not immobilizing them in it or something like that. So there you go. And then, of course, Burnout, a fantastic all-around ability for the Fire Staff offensively and defensively, kind of like Flesh. You can use it to attack and hit an opponent quite easily that's trying to get away from you, or you can use it to escape yourself. The big downside to Burnout is that it has a pretty long wind-up time, so you want to be careful when you use it. One of the best ways, in my opinion, to use a Burnout is to do something like a dodge roll into the Burnout, because it does a little bit of a reposition and gives you iframes before you do the longer wind-up time of that skill. And of course, Runes of Helios being the passive of choice for the ultimate, I guess, passive here. We don't need the sustain from Reheat. And if you're standing in your rune and you land all those crits, you can catch people off guard with the damage the Fire Staff can actually put out on this spec. Now, taking a look at the equipment for this build, starting off with the Rapier, we've got Rogue and Refreshing Move. Ideally, the last perk here would be Keenly Empowered for that additional burst damage. However, Rogue Refreshing Move, definitely the way to go if you don't have the perfect Rapier. Rogue for that backstab damage. Rapier is probably the best weapon in the game for getting behind your opponent and backstabbing them, so Rogue, in my opinion, is the best damage perk on Rapier. And then Refreshing Move, because of those really long cooldowns, and because we already benefit a lot from hitting our opponent with the Rapier, just for cooldown-wise, yeah, this stacks with it nicely and makes the Rapier feel a lot better to play. The Fire Staff here is Keen Speed, Keen, and then I've got Ancient Bane. Ideally, this final perk would be something like Vicious or Plagued Crits to add a little bit more damage to the Fire Staff, but Keen Speed are the must-have two perks. Keen for that additional crit chance in order to proc Keen Speed. Has a 3-second uptime on 30% haste on a 5-second cooldown. It's very, very easy for this build to take a lot of advantage of this perk. So yeah, I really like this on the Fire Staff. And then for the gems on the weapons, both of them are actually Gambit. I like it a lot because this build rolls a ton, so you'll have that damage boost up quite often. And then for the gear here, the hat is Resilient with Sundering Riposte. Gotta have Sundering Riposte for that additional damage when you catch him with it. Roll behind him, big damage from behind. Now on the chest piece, I've got Refreshing and Resilient with Lost Ward. Refreshing, Resilient are the two perks of choice, minus the Sundering Riposte and Empowering Fireball that I've got on the legs. Everything else should be Refreshing, Resilient. The third perk of choice is kind of up to the user, but Freedom and Physical and Elemental Aversions are probably your best options if you can get that perfect piece of gear. The gloves again here are Resilient and Freedom with Efficient Burnout. Definitely don't need Efficient Burnout at all for this build. It's just the gloves that I bought happen to have them. But because I couldn't find a Refreshing glove at the moment that I can still run this build with and reach my attribute points, I've got that Freedom perk on here. The pants, Resilient, Empowering Fireball. Empowering Fireball, super important. Fireball crits can really catch people off guard on this spec. And then last but not least, the boots, Resilient, Physical Aversion. Again, don't have the perfect traits for this build. But I wanted to show you guys my gear with kind of not perfect perks because it's still a very strong and viable build, even if you don't have that endgame setup. Now, taking a look at the jewelry, Divine and Health. This is, in my opinion, the best amulet that you could run. Health, great for PvP to reduce your chance of dying to incoming burst. And then Divine, fantastic for every single source of healing that you have. Moving on to the ring, Hardy and Keen Awareness. Hardy, definitely you want to have because it allows you to do more rolling throughout the course of a fight than you would normally, and you can push your stamina bar a little bit further. Keen Awareness versus thrust damage here. You could go thrust damage if you want to favor even more damage with the Rapier, but I think Keen Awareness all around is the better option just because it gives that Fire Staff a really high crit rate. And, you know, the Rapier doesn't always backstab, so the critical hit chance can come in handy offensively if you're landing unideal hits on your opponent. And then last but not least, we've got Refreshing Toast and Regenerating on the Earring. These are, in my opinion, the best defensive perks you could have for earrings. Additional healing just over time from Regen, and Refreshing Toast just to up basically your healing again. Really, really nice. Now for all of these jewelry pieces here, ideally if they were gold, I would have that refreshing perk on them. That, however, is a very expensive piece of jewelry to buy that as a solo player I cannot really afford right now, so maybe I'll try to make it on my own and roll the dice. That being said, for the earring piece, Nimble is also a fantastic option for the third perk, just for additional stamina sustain. And then taking a look at the gems on the gear here, I have focused mostly on the Wilderness Ward for the physical damage reduction with a little bit of elemental damage reduction. You can see that I've got 13.7 physical and 6.2 elemental. It's up to the user what you want to focus on here. This build does a lot of close quarter fighting, so I think the physical damage reduction makes a little bit more sense, but having an even spread is always a good option too. And then finally, guys, for the consumables, of course, you want to use the best healing and regeneration potions that you have access to. Having a hearty meal on your bar definitely comes in handy, especially for a mobile build like this where you can break distance, get to cover, and then use one of these to quickly heal up without using a potion cooldown. And then for your final consumable slot, I picked the Gemstone Dust. You could go for the Earth Bomb. It's kind of up to the user whether you want to have more resistance against the physical or elemental portion of damage. Seeing as this build does a lot of close quarter fighting, I did favor the physical damage reduction in the gems themselves. But, you know, there's a lot of mages out there. It's a very popular build right now, so I do like the option of having the Gemstone Dust here. Of course, you're going to want to run an attribute buffing food in order to reach the max attributes that this build can get to. Without it, the build will not function as well, so you definitely want to get your hands on some of this food. Some of it's very cheap. The filet and mushroom sauce in particular is very cheap on my server. And then it never hurts to have a honing stone, just increasing that weapon damage so you can hit even harder. Alright guys, let's get right into that PvP commentary. I've got a few fights for you guys, just kind of showing the build in a few different situations and a few different opponents. This footage, unfortunately, is from the previous patch. I do have footage of me playing this build on the new patch in some of my other videos, so I apologize that this is the previous patch's footage. That being said, the big difference between this build from patch to patch is a little bit longer Rapier cooldowns, and the Fire Staff Keen Speed procs a lot more in the new patch than it did previously. So, as you guys can see, I found myself in a corner with a lot of opponents on top of me. I quickly go for the Flesh to get out of there and then reposition on the outside of the outpost here. Using the line of sight from the outpost is super important when dealing with ranged fighters on a build like this. Because my Fire Staff isn't going to trade really well with a powerful ranged opponent, you want to use as much of the corners as possible to deal with that. Unfortunately, I get trapped by the gravity well. Right away, go for my riposte to give myself a little bit of a defensive option there, and then get out of that with the gap closer. And then I go back to the outside, and then right away just go for the Fire Staff gap closer back inside. Again, lots of direction change, and using the gap closer like that around the corner, they don't see me wind it up, so I did manage to land the hit on them. Unfortunately, taking a lot of pressure, forced again to just kind of retreat back up to the top there. These guys don't chase, so I heal up and re-engage, throw the fireball down, go for the burnout there, managed to land a good pillar of fire on that one player there, and I bait a good riposte out of this guy, get him with the counter stun into the heavy attack, and both players very low hit points here, and there's that big crit on the fireball, managed to take that guy down. But I don't avoid the incoming attack from the spear player there, just kind of take the stun, roll away, throw down the pillar of fire. He doesn't end up coming forward, go for the light attack into a riposte. He ends up light attacking right away, so I get the good counter stun and give him the poke to finish him, and then a flesh to get the kill on the downed opponent. And then more players start coming in here. I try to throw down the pillar, getting counter-stunned by them, go back for the kite outside here, go for the riposte and just see if anyone will hit it. One player does connect, but he rolls away right away. And then I go for the burnout in kind of a weird pattern there. I was just trying to get a hit off on that gun player while also trying to make myself difficult to shoot. But as you guys could see, I found myself in a really dangerous spot there, health dropping really low, and I managed to go for a kite back to the outside, heal up, and then the friendly Zerg comes charging in. Now for a fight that's a little bit more controlled than the last one, I've got a simple 3v1 here, just kind of outside in Shattered Mountain. And the first opponent comes charging towards me here, and I just go for the flesh to try to stay on top of him, put some damage in, but he ends up retreating back towards the other friendly players here. And I just throw down the Pillar of Fire and Fireballs, trying to put some connection on these guys. It looks like one of them still focused on the mobs, not on me. So, of course, I go through for the burnout just to get everybody's attention, because that's the kind of guy that I am. And I start attacking the Hammer player's block. He goes for that very slow telegraphed hammer stun, very easy to get the riposte on that. And then he holds block, and I just keep going for those simple light attack poke, dodge roll, light attack flesh, and I managed to get some really nice damage into him, very quickly taking him down. The enemy Void Gauntlet player hits me with the Scream there. I go for the counter riposte. He does a great job dodging that incoming attack, but it buys me the time I need to dodge out of that Void Gauntlet snare, and I just right away start going for some damage on top of the enemy Fire Staff player here. He tries to kite around a little bit. I throw the Pillar of Fire down. This was the previous patch, so the pillar is a lot harder to land against a ranged opponent than it is now. The enemy Void Gauntlet player comes charging in. I get a great read that he's going to go for this Scream there, and I land the riposte right away, and then staying on top of the other player here. So what he's doing is kiting away from me while the other player kind of chases and tries to put pressure on me. Because I'm the fastest person in this fight, I'm just going to stay on top of the guy that's kiting away, and the Void Gauntlet player, for the most part, isn't going to be able to do a lot of pressure outside of a few hits from behind, but we managed to see him coming, go for the burnout right away, and just trying to stay on top of the other player there with the Fire Staff. I switch for a little bit of a target shift to the Void Gauntlet player. He seems like he's just going to be healing up with the Life Staff. He goes for the Scream. I go for the riposte, and he waits it out. Really good move on his part. That's something that smarter players will do when they see the riposte. They'll just kind of try to bait it out and then wait for their opportunity to hit you afterwards. But I just go back again for the target shift on the enemy healer there, trying to keep the pressure on him. The Void Gauntlet player does get me with the Scream from behind, and I'm just going to go back up a little bit, heal up. He put a lot of dots there, and he gets the second Scream there. The cooldown on Scream is a lot more now than it was at the time that I did this fight. And it looks like the Fire Staff player there is also running Void Gauntlet too. He pulls out his Void Blade. I go for the riposte off the heavy attack, seeing both players go for the Void Blade there, and I get excellent damage into them. Now I go for the shootout with the Void Gauntlet player. He was very low HP, and Void Gauntlet players heal you when they attack in a shootout like that. A little bit risky to do, but it ended up paying off. I did manage to get the kill on him, and then I end up fighting that other guy for quite some time until more enemy reinforcements appear, and I get killed. I got one last fight for you guys, showing a fight against this build's biggest weakness. That is a powerful ranged opponent. Your best option against them is to use line of sight and then get on top of them as fast as possible, because they have trouble shooting their projectiles if you're right up in their face. I'll let you guys enjoy the last few seconds of this fight as I say goodbye. Again, check out my website, pvpnewworld.com, for a written guide to this build, as well as written guides on all the other builds I feature on the channel, and some information on the game. If you want to catch some live gameplay from me, you can always give me a follow on Twitch. There's a link down below for you, and there's a link to my Twitter there too if you want to keep up to date with what I'm doing. I feature the New World Top 5 fights. If you got a sweet fight you want to send in, or if you even have a build that you want to see featured on the channel, you can send a link to your footage to Kristofer at pvpnewworld.com. This show is sponsored by What the Fast. They can give you better ping to your favorite games, especially if you have bad ping to start. They're free to try for the first month. There's a link down below for you guys. And then, of course, a massive thank you to all of my patrons on Patreon. Thank you guys so much for supporting the show, for keeping this dream alive for me. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in and watching today. As always, I hope that you all enjoyed. I hope that you guys will come back for some more, and I'll see you next time. Have a great night, everybody.